Hello everyone. In today's video, I bring you an astonishing story that will challenge everything you think you know about life and death. Let's meet Orion Waverly, a skeptical university professor who, after a tragic event, found himself on a journey between hell and heaven. What he discovered on the other side not only transformed his life, but also brought a powerful message about love and redemption. Get ready, because what you are about to hear could change your worldview forever. Before we begin, please give a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to not miss any updates. Now, embark with us on this intense and surprising journey. My name is Orion Waverly, and for all my adult life I have been a university professor. I have always prided myself on my rationality and skepticism. I firmly believed that life was a sequence of random events, without any greater purpose or transcendent meaning. This worldview defined me, shaped my interactions, and guided my academic approach. I was born and raised in a small town in the American Midwest, the son of pragmatic parents who valued education and critical thinking above all. From an early age, I was encouraged to question, to seek evidence, and to accept nothing at face value. This upbringing led me to a brilliant academic career, specializing in art history, a field that allowed me to combine my passion for critical analysis with my love for aesthetics and human creativity. Over the years, I built a reputation as a rigorous scholar and a demanding but fair teacher. My students respected me, although many found me a bit cold and distant. I saw this as a compliment, believing that emotional detachment was essential for academic objectivity. My wife, Sarah, a talented and sensitive artist, was in many ways my antithesis. While I clung to logic and reason, she embraced intuition and emotion. Our relationship was a constant dance between these two poles, a tension that, although sometimes challenging, kept us growing and learning from each other. Until June 1st, 1985, I lived in a world of certainties. I believed I had all the answers, or at least knew how to find them through the scientific method and rational analysis. Little did I know that I was about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the nature of reality. On that fateful day, I was leading a study trip to New Orleans. The city, with its rich history and vibrant cultural scene, had always fascinated me as a microcosm of American artistic evolution. I meticulously planned the trip, eager to inspire my students with the city's unique architecture, jazz music, and art galleries. Little did I know that this trip would be the catalyst for an experience that would fundamentally transform my worldview and understanding of existence. What happened in the following days not only challenged my deeply rooted beliefs, but also forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what might lie beyond. It was our second day in New Orleans, and the humid, warm air of the city felt heavy upon us like a blanket. We were in the French Quarter, surrounded by the unique architecture and vibrant energy that made the place so special. I was in the middle of explaining the French influence on the local architecture when everything changed in an instant. Suddenly, I felt a sharp, piercing pain in my chest, as if someone had plunged a knife between my ribs. The intensity was overwhelming, stealing my breath and making my knees buckle. I tried to lean against a nearby wall, but my vision began to darken at the edges, and the world around me started to spin. I heard muffled screams from my students, their voices sounding distant and unreal. Sarah, who was in the group, rushed to my side, her face a mask of worry and fear. She held my hand, speaking words of comfort that I could barely comprehend. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the sound of sirens approaching. I briefly woke up in the ambulance, the pain still pulsing in my chest. The paramedics moved quickly around me, connecting me to machines and speaking in medical terms that my foggy brain couldn't process. Fear began to set in as I realized the gravity of the situation. I, who had always been in control, was now completely at the mercy of forces beyond my understanding. At the hospital, I was quickly diagnosed with a serious heart condition that required immediate surgery. However, for reasons I did not understand at the time, there was a delay. I was placed in a waiting room, surrounded by other patients at various stages of distress and pain. The atmosphere was heavy with fear and uncertainty. As I waited, the pain continued to grow. Each breath was a struggle, and I could feel my strength waning. Sarah was by my side, holding my hand, her eyes filled with tears that she was bravely trying to hold back. I wanted to comfort her, tell her everything would be okay, but the words wouldn't come. It was at that moment, surrounded by the buzzing of machines and the muffled murmurs of doctors' voices, that I began to accept the possibility that I might not survive. Harchand, who had always seen death as a mere biological end, now found myself confronted with its immediate and terrifying reality. The irony was not lost on me, a staunch skeptic facing the unknown I had always denied. As my consciousness began to waver, I had a moment of crystal-clear clarity. I looked at Sarah, memorizing every detail of her beloved face. I wanted to say so many things, apologize for all the times I had been distant, thank her for her unconditional love, tell her how much I loved her, but all I managed was a weak squeeze of her hand and a trembling smile. Then, I closed my eyes, letting the darkness envelop me. The pain began to fade, replaced by a feeling of deep surrender. In that moment, I let go of my fear, my beliefs, my life as I knew it. And that was when my journey truly began. When I opened my eyes again, or at least thought I had, everything had changed. The searing pain in my chest had completely vanished, replaced by a sense of lightness and well-being that defied any rational explanation. My body, which moments before had seemed to betray me, now felt distant and irrelevant. I looked around, trying to understand where I was. There was no longer the cold, sterile hospital room, nor the monotonous sound of machines. Instead, I found myself in an undefined space, neither dark nor light, but a kind of luminous twilight that seemed to pulse with life of its own. I tried to call for Sarah, for a doctor, for anyone, but my voice produced no sound. It was then that I noticed something surprising. I could see my own body lying on the hospital bed, motionless and pale. Sarah was beside it, holding my physical hand and silently crying. Doctors and nurses were moving frantically around, performing resuscitation maneuvers. The scene was surreal. I was somehow observing my own body from the outside. My rational mind desperately tried to find a logical explanation for what was happening. Was it a hallucination caused by lack of oxygen, a stress-induced lived dream? But there was a clarity and reality to this experience that no dream or hallucination could replicate. As I struggled to comprehend my situation, I realized that I was not alone in this ethereal space. Shadowy figures began to materialize around me. At first, I thought they might be doctors or nurses, but it soon became clear that these entities were not human, at least not in the conventional sense. These figures, cloaked in shadows that seemed to move and undulate, began to pull me away from the hospital scene. I felt a growing fear. Who were they? Where were they taking me? I tried to resist, but my new state of being seemed to have no physical substance to fight against them. As I drifted away from my body and the world I knew, I began to hear voices. They were not comforting or friendly, but hostile and accusatory whispers. The voices mocked me, pointing out every flaw, every moment of selfishness or cruelty in my life. It was as if my entire existence was being dissected and judged, and I was found wanting. Fear transformed into absolute terror. I, who had always believed that death was simply the end of consciousness, now found myself in a state of being that defied everything I thought I knew. There was no peace in death, as I had always imagined, but rather this seemingly endless torment. I tried to rationalize, argue with these entities, using the logic and skepticism that had always been my tools. But my arguments fell on deaf ears. The shadows continued to drag me further away, into an increasingly dark and oppressive place. It was in that moment of total despair that something unexpected happened. From the depths of my mind, a memory emerged, a prayer I learned in childhood. Long before I became a staunch skeptic, without thinking, I began to recite Psalm 23. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The shadowy entities reacted with fury to these words, shouting that God did not exist, that I was alone in this darkness. But something within me clung to those words like a castaway clings to a lifeline. For the first time in decades, I felt a spark of something that could be called faith. As the shadowy entities continued to drag me toward what seemed to be an endless abyss, I felt myself plunging into a state of profound despair. The darkness around me was not just the absence of light. It seemed to have an almost tangible quality, as if it were a living, malevolent entity. The accusatory voices intensified, becoming a cacophony of condemnation. Every mistake I had made, every moment of weakness or selfishness throughout my life was amplified and hurled against me. Memories I had long buried resurfaced, forcing me to relive moments of shame and regret. I saw myself as an ambitious young man, stepping on others in my pursuit of academic success. I relived moments when I had been cold and distant with Sarah, prioritizing my work over our relationship. I watched helplessly as scenes unfolded where my unwavering skepticism hurt people who genuinely sought comfort in faith or spirituality. The emotional pain was unbearable. Each accusation felt like it cut deeper than any physical pain I had ever experienced. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to explain that I wasn't a bad person, that I had good intentions. But my voice seemed powerless in this shadowy realm. Amid the torment, a realization hit me with full force. I had become exactly the kind of person I had always despised. Arrogant, insensitive, so sure of my own opinions that I refused to consider other perspectives. The bitter irony of this epiphany was not lost on me. I, who had always prided myself on my open and rational mind, had closed myself off to possibilities beyond my limited understanding. The shadowy entities seemed to feed off my despair and self-criticism. The more I sank into negative thoughts, the stronger they appeared to become. I tried to fight against them, using my logic and reason to contest their accusations, but my intellectual defenses seemed pathetic and useless in this realm beyond reason. It was in this moment of complete defeat that I heard a different voice. It wasn't an external voice, but seemed to come from somewhere deep within me. It was calm, almost a whisper, but somehow managed to be heard above the clamor of the accusing voices. The voice simply said, "Pray." At first I resisted. I had abandoned prayer decades ago, considering it a crutch for weak minds. But in that moment, confronted with the emptiness of my own beliefs, what did I have to lose? Hesitant, I began to recite the prayers I had learned in childhood. The words came out clumsily and without conviction at first, but as I continued, I felt something change within me. The shadowy entities reacted with renewed fury to my prayer. They screamed that it was useless, that I was beyond salvation, that God, if he even existed, would never forgive me. But for the first time since this journey began, I felt a spark of hope. I clung to that hope with all the strength I had left. I continued praying, no longer reciting memorized words, but expressing the sincere longing of my heart for redemption and understanding. As I prayed, a long-forgotten memory emerged, the song, "Jesus Loves Me," that my grandmother used to sing to me when I was a child. Without thinking, I began to hum the melody softly. The effect was immediate and surprising. The shadowy entities seemed to recoil, as if the mere mention of the name of Jesus was painful for them. The darkness surrounding me began to dissipate, not completely, but enough to give me a glimpse of hope. Encouraged by this change, I continued singing and praying with more fervor. Each word seemed to gain power, illuminating the space around me. The accusing voices, though still present, began to lose their intensity. It was in this moment of transition that I realized something fundamental. The darkness was not just around me, but also within me. It was my own doubts, fears, and regrets that empowered these shadowy entities. By acknowledging this, I felt a profound shift within my being. I began to speak directly to the entities, no longer with fear or anger, but with a newfound compassion. "I understand now," I said. "You are part of me. reflections of the parts I have tried to deny or hide. But I am no longer afraid of you. As I accepted this truth, I felt a sense of lightness spreading through my being. The darkness began to dissipate more rapidly, and a gentle light began to penetrate the gloom. The shadowy entities which had once seemed so threatening began to fade away. In that moment of clarity, I realized I was undergoing a profound transformation. This was not just a near-death experience, but a spiritual rebirth. All the certainties I had about life, death, and the nature of reality were being challenged and reshaped. As the darkness continued to dissipate, a light began to intensify around me. At first, it was just a soft glow, like dawn after a long, dark night. But it quickly gained intensity, becoming brighter than anything I had ever experienced. The light was not just visual, it was a palpable presence, filled with an energy that I can only describe as pure, unconditional love. It was as if every atom of my being was being bathed in this light, filling me with a sense of peace and well-being that I had never known before. As I surrendered to this light, I realized I was not alone. A presence manifested, an entity of light so bright that I initially had difficulty looking directly at it. But there was no fear. Instead, I felt a deep and immediate connection to this presence. The entity approached, and I felt enveloped in an ethereal embrace. In that moment, all the emotional wounds that the shadowy entities had inflicted were instantly healed. It was as if every broken part of my being was being reintegrated and restored. Tears began to flow freely, but they were not tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of relief, of joy, of a love so deep and overwhelming that it threatened to consume me completely. For the first time in my life, I felt truly accepted and loved, not for my achievements or intellect, but simply for being who I was. The presence began to communicate with me, not through words, but through a form of telepathy that transcended language. I understood that I was in the presence of something or someone of infinite wisdom and love. All the questions I had about life, the universe, and my own existence seemed insignificant in the face of this presence. Yet, the entity of light did not dismiss my questions. Instead, with infinite patience and compassion, it began to show me truths that went beyond my previous understanding. I saw the interconnectedness of all things, the beauty and purpose behind what I had previously considered chaos and randomness. I realized that my skepticism and search for truth were not wrong in themselves, but had been limited by my earthly perspective. Reality, I perceived, was infinitely vaster and more complex than I had ever imagined. My quest for truth through science and logic was merely the beginning of a much greater journey. The entity of light showed me that love, not as a fleeting emotion, but as the fundamental force of the universe, was the key to this deeper understanding. I saw how every act of kindness, every moment of compassion, reverberated through the fabric of reality, creating waves of light that extended far beyond what we could perceive in our physical existence. In this state of communion with the light, I lost all sense of time and space. It could have been a moment or an eternity. The distinction no longer held meaning. I was immersed in a state of being that transcended all the limitations I knew. It was then that the entity of light presented me with a choice. I could remain in this state of bliss, continuing my journey beyond the physical veil, or I could return to my earthly life. The decision, I was informed, was entirely mine. Faced with this monumental choice, I felt divided. On one hand, the prospect of staying in this state of pure light and love was incredibly tempting. Here, all the pains, fears, and limitations I had experienced in my earthly life simply did not exist. I was immersed in a feeling of completeness and belonging that I had never known before. On the other hand, I thought of Sarah, of my students, of all the people I would leave behind if I chose not to return. I remembered the unfinished projects, the unspoken words, the relationships that needed healing. There was still so much to be done, so much to be lived. The entity of light, sensing my dilemma, began to show me visions of what could be if I chose to return. I saw myself sharing my experience with others, bringing comfort and hope to those struggling with issues of faith and meaning. I saw myself using my intellect and skepticism not to deny the spiritual, but to build bridges between science and spirituality. At the same time, I was reminded that the return would not be easy. My physical body was damaged, and recovery would be long and painful. More than that, I would be returning with knowledge and a perspective that many would find difficult to understand or accept. I could face skepticism, ridicule, and even ostracism from some of my academic peers. The entity of light assured me that whatever my choice, it would be the right one. There was no judgment, only unconditional love and acceptance. I was reminded that even if I chose to return, this experience and the knowledge I gained would always be part of me. The connection I now felt with the divine would never be completely lost. I pondered deeply. Part of me desperately wanted to stay, to dive deeper into this reality of love and light. But another part, the part that had always sought knowledge and truth, knew there was a purpose in returning. There were lessons to be learned, experiences to be lived, and perhaps most importantly, there was love to be shared in a way that could only be done on the earthly plane. With a mix of reluctance and determination, I communicated my decision to the entity of light. I chose to return. The moment I made this decision, I felt a wave of love and approval emanating from the luminous presence. I was assured that while the path ahead might be challenging, I would never be truly alone. The entity of light began to prepare me for the return. I was instructed to remember that the love I experienced here was the true essence of reality, and that my task would be to bring some of that love back with me to the physical world. I was reminded that every person I encountered in my earthly life was, in essence, a manifestation of that same divine light, even if often obscured by the limitations and challenges of physical existence. As I prepared to leave this realm of light, I felt a deep gratitude for everything I had experienced and learned. I knew I was about to embark on a new phase of my journey, one that would combine my love for reason and knowledge with a new understanding of the spiritual and the divine. With one last ethereal embrace from the entity of light, I felt myself being gently pulled back into the physical world. The light began to fade, and I felt myself descending through layers of consciousness, returning to my damaged body, but now imbued with a purpose and understanding that would completely transform the course of my life. The process of returning to my physical body was an experience in itself. As the light dimmed and I felt myself being pulled back, I went through a series of sensations and states of consciousness that defied description. It was as if I were traveling through multiple dimensions, each with its own reality and logic. In one moment, I felt myself expand to encompass entire galaxies, witnessing the birth and death of stars. In the next, I was smaller than an atom, dancing in the intricate choreography of the subatomic world. Through it all, I maintained the awareness of the love and light I had experienced, like a golden thread guiding me back to my physical being. When I finally landed in my body, the sensation was shocking. After experiencing the freedom and expansion of the non-physical state, my body felt incredibly dense and limited. The pain, which had been absent during my spiritual journey, returned with full force. Every fiber of my being screamed in protest. I opened my physical eyes for the first time in how long? I had no idea how much time had passed since my collapse. The fluorescent light of the hospital was blinding and painful after the ethereal softness of the spiritual realm. The sounds, the beeping of machines, the voices of doctors and nurses, seemed cacophonous and harsh. Sarah was by my side, her eyes red and swollen from crying. When she realized I was conscious, her face lit up with a mix of joy and disbelief. "Orion," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You're back." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and sore from the breathing tube that had been removed. I could only manage a weak smile and a gentle squeeze of her hand. But in that moment, words were unnecessary. The connection I felt with Sarah was profound and immediate, as if I were truly seeing her for the first time. The doctors were surprised and somewhat puzzled by my sudden return to consciousness. I was informed later that I had been in a coma for several days and that my prognosis had not been good. My recovery, they said, was nothing short of miraculous. In the days and weeks that followed, I faced a long and painful physical recovery, surgeries, physical therapy, a multitude of tests and procedures. Each day was a struggle. But the physical pain and discomfort seemed insignificant compared to the internal transformation I was experiencing. My mind was in a constant whirlwind, trying to process and integrate everything I had experienced. As a trained academic, part of me still tried to rationalize and explain my experience in scientific terms. Could it have been a hallucination caused by lack of oxygen to the brain, a chemical reaction to the medications? But deep down, I knew that no purely materialistic explanation could account for the depth and impact of what I had lived. As I physically recovered, I began to notice subtle yet significant changes in my perception and behavior. Colors seemed more vivid, music deeper and more moving. I found myself responding with more patience and compassion to those around me, from healthcare professionals to other patients. Most notably, I felt a profound connection to something greater than myself, a loving presence that constantly reminded me of the light I had experienced. This connection was not something I could explain or prove scientifically, but it was as real and tangible to me as the air I breathed. Sarah noticed the change in me almost immediately. "There's something different in your eyes," she said to me one day. "It's like you're seeing the world in a completely new way." She was right, of course. I was seeing the world in a new way, not just with my eyes, but with my heart and my newly awakened soul. As my physical strength returned, a burning desire grew within me to share my experience, to use what I had learned to make a positive difference in the world. I knew I would face skepticism and even ridicule from some of my academic colleagues, but that no longer mattered. I had experienced something that transcended logic and intellect, and I felt a responsibility to share that truth with others. My journey back to life was just beginning, and I knew the challenges ahead would be significant. But for the first time in my life, I faced the future not with fear or skepticism, but with a profound sense of purpose and an unwavering faith in the power of love and the universal connection I had experienced. In the months following my near-death experience, I underwent a deep internal transformation that affected every aspect of my life. The process was not easy or linear. There were moments of doubt, confusion, and even fear. After all, I was deconstructing and reconstructing my entire worldview. One of the most significant changes was in my approach to knowledge and truth. As an academic, I had always valued critical thinking and empirical evidence. These qualities did not disappear, but they were complemented by a new appreciation for intuition, subjective experience, and what could be called heart knowledge. I began to see that reason and spirituality were not antagonists, but rather two sides of the same coin, two ways of seeking truth that, when integrated, could lead to a deeper and more holistic understanding of reality. This realization led me to explore areas that I would have previously dismissed as pseudoscience or superstition, but now I approached with an open and curious mind. My relationship with Sarah also underwent a profound transformation. The near-death experience made me realize how much I had neglected her in my pursuit of academic success and professional recognition. Now, I clearly saw the love and dedication she had always shown, even when I was distant or indifferent. I began to prioritize our relationship, dedicating time and energy to nurture our connection. Surprisingly, Sarah embraced my transformation with an openness and acceptance that deeply moved me. She told me that during my coma, she had prayed intensely, something she had never done before. "Somehow," she said, "I knew you were going through something important, something that would change our lives forever." My approach to teaching also changed dramatically. Previously, I had focused almost exclusively on conveying information and developing analytical skills in my students. Now, without neglecting those aspects, I also sought to nurture their curiosity, creativity, and emotional connection to the material. I began to incorporate meditative and reflective practices into my classes, encouraging students to explore not only the outer world, but also their inner world. This new approach was not well received by everyone. Some colleagues expressed concern that I was abandoning academic rigor in favor of mysticism. Others were more direct in their criticisms, suggesting that my near-death experience had affected my capacity for rational thought. These criticisms, which would have deeply shaken me before, now seemed less important. I knew, at the deepest level of my being, that what I had experienced was real and meaningful. More than that, I saw the fruits of this transformation in how my students responded, in the strengthening of my marriage, and in the inner peace I now felt. One of the deepest changes was in my relationship with death. Before, I viewed death as the definitive end, a terrifying void that rendered life ultimately meaningless. Now, while I still respected the mystery of death, I no longer feared it. I had experienced a continuity of consciousness beyond the physical, and this fundamentally changed my perspective on life and death. This new perspective led me to re-examine many of my priorities and values. I began to engage more in volunteer work and social causes, feeling a responsibility to use my talents and resources to make a positive difference in the world. The accumulation of wealth and status, which had once seemed so important to me, now felt secondary compared to the pursuit of connection, understanding, and service to others. I also developed a new appreciation for nature and the natural world. I began to see the interconnectedness of all things, from the smallest subatomic particle to the vast galaxies. This perspective led me to adopt more sustainable practices and to become a more vocal advocate for environmental protection. As I integrated these changes into my life, I felt an increasing calling to share my experience with a wider audience. I began writing about my journey, first in a personal diary, then in academic articles, and eventually in a book aimed at the general public. The process of writing was both therapeutic and challenging. I struggled to find words that could adequately capture the depth and transcendence of what I had experienced. At the same time, I was aware of the need to present my story in a way that could resonate with both skeptics and believers. Throughout this process of transformation, I maintained a constant connection with the loving presence I had encountered during my near-death experience. This connection became my anchor, guiding me through the challenges and uncertainties I faced. It was not an external voice telling me what to do, but an inner wisdom that helped me navigate life with more grace and purpose. As I fully embraced this new way of being, I felt myself reborn not only spiritually but in every aspect of my existence. It was as if I were seeing the world and myself through new eyes, with a clarity and depth I had never experienced before. As my personal transformation unfolded, I began to notice the impact it was having on those around me. At first, the reactions were mixed. Some were intrigued and inspired by my new perspective, while others felt uncomfortable or skeptical. My family was the first to notice and respond to the change. Sarah, in particular, seemed to blossom with the new dynamism in our relationship. She told me it was as if she had regained the man she had fallen in love with, but a deeper and more compassionate version. Our children, now adults pursuing their own careers, were initially perplexed by my transformation. Over time, however, our relationship deepened as we shared more open and meaningful conversations about life, death, and purpose. In the academic environment, reactions were more varied. Some colleagues saw me as someone who had lost their way, abandoning scientific rigor in favor of New Age ideas. Others, however, were intrigued. A colleague from the psychology department approached me in particular, sharing that he had had a similar experience years before, but had never felt comfortable discussing it in the academic setting. My students, on the other hand, seemed to respond overwhelmingly positively to my new teaching approach. Classes became more interactive and reflective. We discussed not only facts and theories, but also their meaning and relevance to our lives. Many students sought me out after class for deeper conversations, sharing their own existential and spiritual questions. One day, a student named Emily approached me after class, tears in her eyes. She shared that she had been struggling with suicidal thoughts, feeling overwhelmed by academic pressure and a sense of lack of purpose. "Your story and your new way of teaching have given me hope," she said. "They made me realize there's more to life than grades and academic achievements." This encounter with Emily was a turning point for me. I realized that my experience and subsequent transformation were not just for my personal benefit, but had the potential to profoundly impact the lives of others. I began to accept more invitations to speak and conduct workshops, not only in academic settings but also in hospitals, community centers, and even support groups for those dealing with grief or terminal illnesses. In one of those talks, I met an oncologist who was particularly moved by my story. He invited me to work with him on a research project examining how near-death experiences affect patients' attitudes toward life and death. This project eventually became a groundbreaking study, combining quantitative and qualitative approaches to examine the impact of transcendent experiences on mental and physical health. As my story spread, I began receiving letters and emails from people around the world who had undergone similar experiences. Many expressed relief at finally finding someone who could validate and articulate what they had gone through. Others, who had not had such experiences, wrote to say how my story had helped them cope with their fear of death or find a sense of purpose in their lives. One of the most unexpected developments was the impact on my own physical health. Doctors were surprised by the speed and completeness of my recovery following the cardiac event. Moreover, I noticed that I felt more energized and vibrant than I ever had, even when I was much younger. Medical examinations confirmed significant improvements in various health markers. Although it could not be scientifically proven, I felt that my newly discovered connection with a broader reality was having a direct positive effect on my physical well-being. However, not all the impact was positive or easy to deal with. Some people approached me expecting that I would have all the answers or that I could perform some kind of miracle. I had to learn to establish healthy boundaries and constantly remind people that I was just a human being, sharing my experience, not a guru or savior. Additionally, the attention I began to receive was sometimes overwhelming. Reporters wanted interviews, publishers proposed book deals, and even Hollywood producers expressed interest in adapting my story for film. While I was grateful for the opportunity to share my message more broadly, I also struggled to maintain a balance between my new mission and my personal and professional life. Despite the challenges, the overall impact on my life and the lives of those around me was profoundly positive. I witnessed relationships heal, people find new purposes, and a growing network of individuals committed to a more compassionate and interconnected vision of reality. As I reflected on this journey and its impact, I felt humbled and grateful for the opportunity to be a catalyst for positive change. I realized that my near-death experience was not just about me or even about life after death. It was about how we live our lives here and now, how we connect with each other and the world around us, and how we can bring a little more light and love into our everyday existence. As I sit down to write these final reflections, nearly a decade has passed since that fateful day in New Orleans. The impact of that near-death experience continues to reverberate in my life in ways I could never have imagined. Looking back, I see my journey as a kind of rebirth. The Orion Waverly who entered that hospital in 1985 is not the same man who writes these words today. The transformation was not only spiritual or philosophical but holistic, affecting every aspect of my being. One of the deepest lessons I learned is the illusory nature of the divisions we create in our lives and in our society. The lines we draw between science and spirituality, between reason and intuition, between self and other. All these boundaries began to dissolve in light of my experience. I realized that reality is much more interconnected and unified than our intellectual paradigms often allow us to see. This understanding led me to a more integrative approach in my academic work and my personal life. Instead of viewing the world through the narrow lenses of specific disciplines, I began to seek connections and syntheses. This resulted in fascinating collaborations with colleagues from diverse fields, from neuroscientists studying the brain correlates of mystical experiences to quantum physicists exploring the fundamental nature of consciousness. Another crucial lesson was the importance of love and compassion. During my experience, I was immersed in an unconditional love that transcended anything I had ever known. Bringing that love back into the everyday world has been both a challenge and a blessing. I learned that love is not just a feeling, but a transformative force that has the power to heal, unite, and illuminate. This understanding led me to a deeper commitment to serving others. Whether through teaching, writing, or volunteering, I strive to be a channel for that love I experienced. It's not always easy. The world often seems to resist such efforts. But I've found that even the smallest acts of kindness can have profound and far-reaching effects. My perspective on death also changed radically. While I fully respect the grief and loss that physical death brings, I no longer see it as a definitive end. Instead, I view it as a transition, a portal to a more expansive state of being. This vision does not diminish the preciousness of earthly life, but adds a layer of meaning and purpose to our existence here. One of the questions I am most frequently asked is whether my experience proves the existence of an afterlife or a spiritual realm. My answer is always the same. My experience is precisely that, my experience. I cannot and do not want to impose it as a universal truth. What I can say is that it fundamentally changed my understanding of reality and gave me a peace and certainty that no logical argument or empirical evidence could provide. Over the years, I have encountered many others who have had similar experiences. While the details vary, common themes emerge: a feeling of deep peace, an encounter with a loving presence, a sense of interconnectedness with the entire universe. These similarities make me think that perhaps we are all touching different aspects of a greater reality that we have yet to fully understand. As I grow older, I find myself increasingly at peace with the mystery of existence. My near-death experience did not answer all my questions. In fact, in many ways, it created even more. But it gave me a perspective that values both the known and the unknown, the tangible and the intangible. Looking to the future, I feel a mixture of anticipation and serenity. I do not know what tomorrow will bring, but I carry with me the certainty that we are more than our physical bodies, that we are connected to something greater than ourselves, and that love is the most powerful force in the universe. My journey continues, as does that of all of us. My hope is that by sharing my story, I can inspire others to embrace life in all its complexity, to seek their own truths, and to cultivate a deeper connection with the world around them and the mystery that envelops us all. As I conclude these reflections, I feel a deep gratitude for the life I have lived, for the people I have encountered, and for the extraordinary experience that has been granted to me. Whatever destination awaits us beyond this life, I am at peace knowing that every moment here is a precious opportunity to love, learn, and grow. And so, dear reader, I leave you with an invitation. Be open to the possibilities that exist beyond our everyday perceptions. Cultivate love in your life. Seek truth with passion and humility. And always remember that, in the end, we are all part of something wonderfully greater than we can imagine. With gratitude and hope, Orion Waverly. If you enjoyed this beautiful spiritual testimony, please give a like, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to catch every new video and help us spread this message to a larger audience. Until next time.